Yeah, the three other topics I wanted to discuss were the LGBTQ advocates advocating for children to take puberty blockers. And then I wanted to talk to you about a number of individuals that had transitioned, into the opposite sex to only transition back into their actual gender and their testimonies. And I also want to talk to you a little bit about Black Lives Matter and their agenda and how that ties into everything, and wrapping it up with a nice little bow about how all of this ties into the Ryan Reynolds commercial and ESPN commercial and the sign of the times. It's sad because our children need to be taught how to think, not what to think. They're not educating them, they're indoctrinating them. But let's get into this World Tribune article. Okay, so here we go. World Tribune. Transgender activists put all kids on puberty blockers until they decide their gender, by World Tribune, posted on December 14th of this year, 2020. Now it says all children should be put on puberty blockers until they decide for themselves which gender they want to be, a transgender activist said. Not being at peace with the knowing that they were born the way in which they should be, and how that they were born the way in which they should be demonstrated before the world, given praise to the Creator for the creation. Everything anti-God. Article goes on to read, Lauren McNamara, known by followers as Zinnia Jones, said that children should be legally able to consent to the administration of puberty blockers since they already de facto consent to the permanent and irreversible changes that come naturally. Key word, that come naturally through puberty, the Blaze reported on Monday. If children can't consent to puberty blockers which cause any permanent changes, even with the relevant professional evaluation, how can they consent to the permanent and irreversible changes that come with their own puberty with no professional evaluation whatsoever, McNamara tweeted. McNamara added, an inability to offer informed consent or understand the long-term consequences is actually an argument for putting every single cis and trans person on puberty blockers until they acquire that ability. McNamara contends that puberty became optional when technology was developed to enable deliberate choice between natal puberty and puberty induced by cross-sex hormones. This is so anti the Most High in every way imaginable. According to her YouTube fans, this individual has followers. According to her YouTube fan page, McNamara is an atheist. What did I just say? Anti-Most High. An atheist American commentator who has posted numerous videos critical of religion, especially in regards to its attitudes towards LGBTQ people. Zinnia is openly transgender and has been on hormone replacement therapy since September of 2012. Zinnia was assigned male at birth and given the name Zachary Antelock in 1989 in Chicago, but she became aware of her sexuality as a gay male at an early age, her profile states. After years of identifying as a gay male, Zinnia finally came to the conclusion that she was actually a trans woman in 2011 and started a romantic relationship with her close friend and lesbian Heather McNamara. Becoming an adoptive mother towards Heather's two children, Zinnia is currently in a polyamorous relationship with Heather and another trans woman named Penny. The profile continues. How is this healthy? Not just for Zinnia and her partner, but the children that they're allegedly attempting to parent. When there's so much confusion around self, The whole process of life is to come to clarity about self. This is not clarity about self and acceptance of self. This is mutilation and confusion about self. Now, this is Walt Heyer. He has his own ministries, and he lived as a transgender woman for 8 years and transitioned back into his natural born identity as male. Take a listen to his testimony.
Your story, and I'm fascinated medically how those procedures were done, but God bless you. Do you consider the situation, I understand you consider the situation with Caitlin to be somewhat dangerous?
Well, I think it has the potential to be dangerous for sure. And I think one of the things is that the tremendous amount of media and exposure to someone at this point in a transition with all of the pressure and all of the things going on, certainly this is the key time in a transgender's life and certainly is exciting. But I worry about the time when the lights go off and the shows go off and all of a sudden, nobody's around.
You're there with your private, as we say, you're there with your private thoughts. Now, Walt, you felt you needed to get the surgery. Why did you get it if, after all, you didn't really need it?
Well, I started as a child transgender at the age of 4 or 5, and I began cross-dressing and did that throughout my life. I did get married like Bruce and had 2 children, had a fairly normal family, but I was still struggling with gender identity issues. I had this tremendous desire to change genders that just continued to build and build over the years.
And then why did it remit after you had the surgery?
Remit? Well, it was when I had the surgery, I was excited. People came up to me and said, "You've never been happier." And I was doing well. I mean, I was successful, and I lived successfully for 8 years.
As a woman?
I enjoyed being, as a woman, I enjoyed it.
Well, what went wrong?
Well, after about 8 years, and I started studying psychology because I wanted to become a counselor and help people, I started to realize that there's a lot of other things that hadn't been talked about regarding transgenders. And I learned that many transgenders suffer from what we call comorbid disorders. They're secondary disorders that are not diagnosed prior to surgery, such as separation anxiety, dissociative disorders, bipolar disorders.
But I would argue, Erica, I think you'd say the same thing, which is that that's well known to be the case, but that doesn't typically change the gender issue.
Well, no, I kind of agree with you. What's his name? I'm sorry?
His name is Walt.
Walt, okay, I agree with you in that. I think that's why I say it's so important to get, therapy and to really know that it's something that you want to do, because you could be, transgender and want to change sexes, or it could be there could be a mental illness.
But even when
and
there
he's
are,
saying
but
that
listen,
when researching he recognized that there were other things, and it wasn't the transgender thing.
Hold on. My experience has been, and Walt straightened me out on this, and my experience has been that even when you treat the associated, the comorbid disorders, the gender issues remain. So I'm curious why they suddenly remitted or reversed in your case, even when you were living happily as a woman. That's confusing to me.
Well, because a lot of times if the disorder is treated properly, the desire to change genders won't be there.
But not typically. Not typically, though, right?
Well, the thing about it is there isn't real good data to say typically one way or the other. We do know, and I know from my website that gets 30,000 hits a month, that people write me all the time and acknowledge that they were suffering from a disorder that started in their childhood that was never addressed prior to surgery, and they themselves decided to transition back like I did.
See, when the lights go out and you're there with your private thoughts, you mean when you're there with yourself. He enjoyed living as a woman, no bigotry, no injury from the public. He had a very successful life, but when the lights went out and he was left with his private thoughts, his self, i.e. the Most High, started ministering to his spirit about the way in which he was conducting himself and his mental stability, in a sense, there was issue.
Did you hear what Walt said? Walt said that when the psychology and the medical alignments are made and the ailments are treated, the contentment with self from nature, from birth, the initial natural state arises. That has been his life experience. And also his experience in working with the over 30,000 individuals that frequent his site. Now let's hear another testimony coming from Miss Wanda Jo Taylor. Now Miss Wanda lived 30 years of her life as a man, and she was healed. And her testimony is one of when the church actually works. See, a lot of churches don't want to deal with this. They don't know how to deal with this. So they shun it. But let's hear from her. Let's hear her testimony.
Boys was rough and tough like myself, and the girls was dainty and pretty. And, you know, and I was attracted to them, and I knew that at a young age.
Her mother, Opal, thought her youngest child was going through a phase.
I knew she was a tomboy, but everybody said, just leave her alone. She'll grow out of it.
But Wanda couldn't change what she was feeling.
Back then, you know, I was like, I feel like a boy trapped in a girl's body, and I didn't understand me.
Wanda Jo embraced her identity as a boy and started having sexual contact with other girls. She managed to keep it a secret until at 18, she got caught with a neighbor girl.
I came out to tell the whole world I was gay and I was proud. And I lived my life the way I wanted to live my life. I couldn't live my life with my mother, nobody. I did with Wanda Jo, I did my will, what I wanted to do.
It hurt. I cried every day.
After high school, Wanda Jo landed a good-paying job as a computer programmer and dove into the homosexual lifestyle.
I went to clubs, gay parties, gay parades. I did it all. I walked into a topless club, looking like a man, dressing like a man, smelling like a man.
I prayed all the time, hoping that she would change. But she went through so many women.
For the next 30 years, Wanda Jo pursued many women and had a few serious relationships. But they were chaotic, at times violent.
You're fighting and no trust, the jealousy, the envy, the drama that's in that lifestyle that I was in.
None of them gave Wanda Jo what she really wanted.
I was searching for love in all the wrong places. That's what I was searching for.
The one thing Wanda Jo never indulged in was drugs and alcohol. But when she nearly died after one of her lovers stabbed her, she found crack cocaine eased the physical and emotional pain.
I was just tired. I was so tired, I didn't know what to do, you know.
For 2.5 years, she lived at the mercy of a crack cocaine addiction and dropped down to a mere 98 pounds. Finally, Wanda Jo remembered something she learned in church as a child, that in times of despair, she could always call on God.
Next thing you know, I was so broken. My God, I was broken. I was tired so much of just everything. I went home and got on my knees and I cried out to God. And I said, God, take this away from me. Jesus, help me. And when he did a snap of a finger, blink of an eye.
Wanda Jo says her desire for cocaine was completely gone. And that deliverance by God fueled a hunger to return to church. She found one that accepted her, just as she was.
Never forget a day I was in the church. I had been going there maybe in my men's suits. They loved me. See, they let me come in the church broken, lost, as the sinner that I was. I was like, wow, they was treating me with so much love. And now he's talking the truth, the word. And now I'm getting this word in my heart.
Wanda Jo continued going to church and reading the Bible. For the first time, after 30 years living as a man, she discovered her true identity.
opened up my Bible to the scripture that he gave me. And the scripture was Isaiah 43:18-19. And it says, remember not the former things, neither consider the things of old. God said, behold, I do a new thing, and a new thing shall spring forward. Shall ye not know it? I make a road in the wilderness and a river in the desert. But I read it the third time. And when I read it the third time, he said, remember not the former things, all the gay stuff and all that. He was right there and at the time. Neither consider the things, on drugs and crack and all that, and whoremongering, fornicating, committing adultery, lying, cheating.
Right at that moment, her mother called. Wanda Joe told her everything God had showed her in the scriptures.
Who are you then? My mama heard for 30 years I was gay, I was butch, and I was a stud. She said, Wanda Joe, 12 o'clock midnight. Who are you then, Wanda Joe? I said, the old Wanda Joe is gone. I'm the new Wanda Joe. It scared myself. I said, woo!
Wanda Joe gave her life to Jesus Christ that night in 2007.
And when people see me now, they be like, they know they're looking at a miracle. I said, I'm just like Jesus, his first miracle, turning water into wine. The old Wanda Joe was the water, the new Wanda Joe is the wine. And I said, I'm a miracle, hallelujah. I said, I'm a miracle to myself. He took that desire away. I don't desire women no more. He took that desire away.
See, society will tell you that's not possible. You're born this way. There's no changing. Even church will tell you you should become eunuch. And it's crazy. But I want to keep going on with these testimonies. I want you to hear from this young lady that was parented in a same-sex marriage. And she's actually speaking against same-sex marriage right now. Her name is Katie Faust. Check her out.
By same-sex parents are describing her mother as a loving gay parent. She's in Canberra to lobby against same-sex marriage. Katie Faust joins us now from Parliament House. Thanks for being there.
Thanks so much for having me.
Have you actually managed to speak to any Australian politicians yet?
We did. My partner in crime, Millie Fontana, who is a resident of Melbourne and also raised by two mothers, and I had a chance to speak with a couple members of Parliament yesterday.
Not the Prime Minister so far?
No, he hasn't called yet.
Now, how is it that the daughter of lesbian mothers has become a leading opponent of gay marriage? How does that work?
Well, simply because I recognize that while my mother was a fantastic mother, and most of what I do well as a mother myself I do because that's how she parented me, she can't be a father. Her partner, an incredible woman, both of these women have my heart, cannot be a father either. Children have a right to be in relationship with their mother and father whenever possible. And as a society, we shouldn't normalize a family structure that requires children to lose one or both parents to be in that household.
Now, trying to sway the US Supreme Court to rule against gay marriage, you wrote to Justice Anthony Kennedy before that vote, and you said, you used to say, I'm happy my parents got divorced so I could get to know all you wonderful women. Now you seem to be saying that was all a lie.
Well, there's a lot of pressure on children of gay parents to please their parents, to sort of carry the banner forward for them. And you can read about this not just in conservative publications, but even books like Families Like Mine, which was publicized by a pro-gay marriage daughter of gays, and she admitted, and several of the kids in that book admitted, that it's very difficult to be honest about this because of the political pressure surrounding this topic. There's several children that have contacted me even since I started writing about this saying, I agree with you, but I'll never come out and speak about this publicly because my relationship with my parent is too tenuous.
Now, Katie, did you find God somewhere in this journey towards anti-gay marriage?
Well, I was not raised a Christian, but I did become a Christian in high school.
And did that change things? I mean, did you decide that homosexuality was against the scriptures, against God's will, something of that nature?
Well, it took a long time, honestly, for me to get on board with what biblical sexuality says, because there's a very fierce protectiveness, I think, that all children have for their parents. But what I was delighted to find when I read Scripture is that God has an incredible heart for the orphan, and that He's very concerned with the plight of children. And that lines up very much with where we need to go in this discussion, which is focusing on the rights of children primarily, as opposed to emphasizing the desires of adults, which tend to take center stage when we're talking about this issue.
Now, after your parents divorced, because you originally had a father and a mother, they divorced. Your father, you say, went off with other women. Why have you focused your main criticism on the homosexual part of the equation and not your father?
Well, I think that I'm pretty fair in my statements to say that whether you're heterosexual or homosexual, children have rights. And adults, the onus needs to be on adults to conform to the rights of children rather than children fitting into an adult's lifestyle. And certainly, I don't think that homosexuals are responsible by any means for the crisis that we face in America when it comes to family structure these days. Absolutely, heterosexuals have led the way on that charge. I got into this discussion primarily because what I heard from the gay lobby was that children don't care who's raising them, right? That children are just fine if it's 2 men or 2 women. And the reality is that anybody that's talked to a child who has lost a parent, whether through divorce, abandonment, third-party reproduction, or death, kids absolutely care. Family structure matters to children. And so I heard the LGBT lobby saying it doesn't care, they don't care, and I don't think that that's reality.
Okay, you also were motivated politically once President Obama announced his support for same-sex marriage, and you set up an anonymous blog called Ask the Bigot. Why did you do that? What did you call it that to start with, and what happened when you did it?
Yes. Well, you know, strangely, the URL wasn't taken for that web name. Not sure why, but it was kind of born in an angry moment. I'm not really a confrontational person, but what happened when Obama evolved is, to me, it felt like media was free to play the bigot card. So now everybody that doesn't support gay marriage is a bigot, right? Because either you're isolated and you don't know any gay people, or you're indoctrinated, or you're homophobic, or you're the equivalent of a racist. And they were not giving any attention to people that had a genuine argument, a well-founded, secular, convincing argument for support of traditional marriage. And so I started blogging anonymously.
I was going to make that point. You started blogging anonymously. What happened? Why did you go public, as it were?
I didn't. I was outed by a gay blogger who felt like I needed to be held accountable for my stance. And the truth is that I would not have filed a brief with the Supreme Court. I wouldn't be having this interview with you today because I never intended to be involved in the legal fight. But because I was outed in the name of love and tolerance, I am talking with you today.
She was outed in the name of love and tolerance. Isn't that funny? But this is a serious issue as we start talking about gay marriage. And there's a gentleman, I want to take you through his life's journey. The gentleman's name is Dr. Robert Oscar Lopez. I'm going to be showing you 3 videos that document his journey from 7 years ago to 2 years ago to 11 months ago. And he's also a child of a same-sex union. And he's also began speaking out about same-sex unions and adoption. Take a listen.
I've spent 40 years in the LGBT community because I was raised by a lesbian with the help of her female partner, and I came out as bisexual over 20 years ago. I'm also a humanities scholar with 15 years of experience as a professor, and I reject the notion that there is any consensus on any side about same-sex parenting in any academic discipline. Same-sex love and same-sex parenting same-sex parenting and same-sex marriage have been intertwined in this debate, and this places me in a conflict of conscience. I know that couples like my mother and her partner deserve to have their love recognized, but I also know as a child in that situation that there is something missing when you have a parent of one sex that is not there. I only have 2 minutes here and can't begin to address the many reasons that we need to slow down in the rush to same-sex marriage. Doug Mainwaring and I have founded the CFA, or the Site for Ethical Family Alternatives, which we are launching to try to bring together LGBT voices from left and right to have the debate that has not taken place yet in the United States. We've heard a lot from religious objectors to homosexuality, and we've heard a lot from LGBT activists who feel that they have earned property rights to children through their activism. We have not heard from people on the left who are worried about the social justice concerns of international exploitation through surrogacy contracts with poor women in the third world. We haven't heard about 13th Amendment violations in the buying and selling of children to meet a market demand for same-sex couple parenting, or the social inequality that gay marriage may worsen among LGBTs ourselves. We have not heard enough from children's rights advocates about the full debate on whether a child has a right to a mother and a father, how or whether this law might encourage more divorce among fragile mixed orientation marriages that already exist, or the extent to which legalizing gay marriage may transform children from free citizens entrusted to those who conceived them into the property of adults who acquire them. So I say we need more time. There is no rush. I've been in the LGBT community for 40 years. We'll get by, we'll survive. Our relationships are doing, pretty well. Let's take time to really try to consider all of the different aspects of this before we rush into something that might have unintended consequences. And on unintended consequences, I just want to point out that I had to clean out a lot of apartments of people who died of AIDS. And in the 1970s, when people drastically changed sexual culture, they could not have foreseen that that disease was going to happen. So we have to ask, what are the unforeseen consequences of making a change this big? Thank you very much.
You have a fascinating story, and it's one that has, I know your telling of the story has raised a lot of controversy for you in your life. We'll get to that in a moment, but just tell me a little bit about your story and beginning with your childhood.
Well, I just had a 1 in a million life. It was just a very strange experience. My mother was gay, so she raised me while she was in a relationship with the same woman from the time I was a baby to the time that I was 19. And at that point, my mother died. So I had this experience of growing up in what you could call a gay home in the 1970s and 1980s when that was unheard of. Nobody really even spoke about it. And then I started in with the gay lifestyle at age 13, and I was pretty active in it, but then I fell in love with a woman when I was 28, and I came to Christ soon after that, and so I've been married and I have 2 kids. I've been married since 2001. My life disproves the born gay idea, the idea that people are born gay and can't change, and then my life disproves the idea that gay parenting is totally fine. So I'm sort of a walking narrative bomb, and that was how I experienced a lot of my life. I kept very quiet after meeting my wife. I didn't speak publicly about any of these issues, but I had a religious experience around 2008 where I really felt the Lord coming to me and telling me, I brought you out of a really dark situation, and now you have to pay me back. You were bought, and you are here to serve me, and so you have to spread the Lord's gospel. And so I felt that I did have to go public and say, this is what happened to me, and this is what the truth behind these issues are. And it became really pertinent, really timely in 2012 when the debate about gay parenting heated up, and I published my first paper just openly discussing all of this. And after that, the floodgates opened, I think within about 4 hours of the publication of my essay on public discourse. There were well over 40 officials in California State University who were contacted, and people were demanding investigations. They were demanding my dismissal. They were demanding, disciplinary proceedings, all of these different things, because they said that it was hate speech.
That's amazing. So you just telling your personal story and your own reflections on your own experience growing up, it was considered to be hate speech and was treated that way.
The truth is considered hate speech. The truth about the Bible, the truth about what the Bible really says. That's the thing, is that I think a lot of these things that they call hate speech are just truths that they don't want to face. I mean, they don't want to face up to what it really does to people when you're initiated into homosexuality at the age of 13.
So tell me about what you have experienced and, frankly, what you've suffered as a result of going public with your story of growing up, and then also with your story of coming out of the homosexual lifestyle to enter into a heterosexual marriage.
Well, right now, these cultural debates are in a state of war. I think the two sides of the debate function like 2 different military operations, for lack of a better word. And their goal is complete annihilation of the enemy, and that's basically what I experienced. It's like having every single weapon thrown at you in the span of this short period of time. I Obviously, I'm no longer at that job. It was from 2012 until 2016 when I left. It was just 4 years of sheer conflict every single day. I would set foot on the campus. You know, there was a professor who sent me hot links to pornography in the email. I had things vandalized on my door, notes slipped under my door, obscene messages on my phone. The students started making up stories about me. I was under constant investigation. The administration turned against me. My colleagues all either betrayed me or they just sort of stood back and they didn't say anything. Every time I was on Twitter or Facebook, I was just bombarded with all of this constant hostility. And then my friends from the past, one by one, all broke away. Most of my family, about 85% of my family, cut off contact with me. So it was just me, my wife, and my kids, and my church.
Why is it so threatening? Why is your story, your narrative, your experiences, why do you think they are so threatening to the left that they have to hound you everywhere you go?
I think homosexuality came into vogue because it was a left-wing ideal that cost people nothing. All people have to do is to say, I don't hate them, and they feel like heroes. But what that really shows is a total contempt for people who are actually in that community. Because how are people doing in the LGBT community? They have incredibly high rates of eating disorders, anxiety, depression, suicide, steroid abuse, drug abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault. They're miserable.
Welcome back to Focus today. Steve Johnson with you. And our guest today is Robert Oscar Lopez. Now, he has an interesting background. He's written a couple of books that tie into that background. He is a professor who is formerly gay and also an abuse survivor and author of several books. One of them is called Wacko, Thugs, and Perverts, and another one called The New Normal, The Transgender Agenda. And I want to get into the topic of why he was dismissed from Southwestern Baptist Seminary. It sounds fascinating. Robert Oscar, thanks for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
All right, let's back up a little bit here to before we get to the questions that and some of the statements that I think you want to make for sure. Give us your background because you know there's this statement that says that being gay is something you can't change, and yet you did. So tell us your story.
Well, I grew up in the gay community, and I got introduced into homosexual activity at the age of 13. It's pretty young, and it was abusive, but I didn't realize that at the time. It just felt normal because I was growing up in that environment. And I was in the gay lifestyle until the age of 28. Then I met my wife. We fell in love, and I got married. And so we've been together for 20 years. So I've had a full life on both sides of the fence, and I didn't want to come forward and talk about this, but there were a lot of controversies in the public domain in 2011 and 2012. So I came forward with my story, both about having grown up in a gay home and my bisexual life history. And at that time, I was calling myself bisexual when I came forward because I just didn't know what terminology I could use to describe my life history. But basically, I'm living as a heterosexual. I have been heterosexual for 20 years. So I came forward, and then there was an explosion in commentary, the backlash against me. I had to leave my job in California. I had tenure. So I came to a Baptist seminary, and I thought I was safe. And then now this has happened at the seminary. So in my ministry, I've always emphasized the fact that, yes, you can change. I've always emphasized the fact that it is not enough for us to say that marriage is between a man and a woman. If we're Christians and we take the gospel seriously, we have to have ministries that help people who are trapped in this life and the families that are dealing with their kids in their lives. And I was critical of a lot of people in the Christian world for not really taking those ministries seriously to help people. I was critical of the fact that they talked a lot about religious liberty, which basically allowed heterosexual Christians to not have to deal with this issue. And I saw how in the church ministries, there were so many young people who were coming in who had been abused, either emotionally or psychologically or sexually, that the church wasn't really helping them. So in my ministry, I have very much emphasized the work that the Christian world can do to help people get out. I don't think you can force somebody. You can't make a decision for someone to get out of this lifestyle.
But it's important to have resources and to give support to the people who do decide to get out. And that put me in conflict with many people in the Christian world who either don't want to talk about the issue, especially as it becomes sensitive and people get uncomfortable with the details, or with people who want to have a middle ground where they say, yes, homosexuality is a sin, but you don't have to change your identity. We believe that your orientation is fixed and unchangeable, and you can just become celibate. So I coexist with people who have those positions, but they can't coexist with mine. And that's where the conflict came.
Well, you know, there's all sorts of different areas where we could go off on all of this. But I think one thing that might be a defining point is that you worked for Southwestern Baptist Seminary and then were dismissed. Give us the story. What happened there?
Well, I was working at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and because of all the things I just talked about, a new administration came in after Paige Patterson was removed. And the new administration under Adam Greenway, they called me in for many meetings and basically pressured me to stop discussing this. They didn't want me going to a lot of conferences. They didn't want me writing about this. They didn't want me giving interviews to people about this. And finally, after a number of meetings, my dean told me basically the process of getting approval for making public statements is not really the issue. The issue is they don't want me to be discussing this anymore. And then the following week, I went into the provost, and the provost said that I should resign if I still wanted to continue to do all these things. And if I was not willing to let them tell me what I could and could not publish, he said, you have to resign. And I said I would not resign because that was a violation of my conscience and it would make me disobey God. And then I was fired 2 months later.
Okay, so, and I wish that we also had them on with us to talk about this. But from what I'm gathering, you're saying is that you were on the same side as they were as far as what is considered a biblical relationship, right? That means you're not gay. It should be heterosexual.
Ooh, so much to unpack, from puberty blockers to, you know, the man that was man, married, then woman, then transitioned back to man, bald hair, to Wanda Joe Taylor that lived 30 years as a man, to Katie Faust talking about the different dilemmas she was faced growing up in a same-sex marriage, to Dr. Robert Oscar Lopez. And I want to wrap all of this up by talking about wacky Black Lives Matter, because all of this ties into the indoctrination of a nation, especially the youth. So stay tuned. Part 4 or episode 4 is on its way.